Jim Rickards, and as a former advisor to the CIA and the Pentagon, I feel it's my duty to warn you about what could unfold in America in the coming days. I'm holding in my hand an official government document that was not intended for public distribution, but it was released by the New York Times. It's the government plan to fight the coronavirus crisis, and in order to prepare for the worst, on page 4 it says in plain English, and I quote, "A pandemic will last 18 months or longer and could include multiple waves of illness. If you've been following the news, you already know that the markets are crashing and our economy is ground to a halt. Which is why famous hedge fund manager Bill Ackman said, 'Hell is coming. America will end as we know it. Capitalism does not work in an 18-month shutdown.'" Look, I'm about to show you undeniable proof that this current economic shutdown could trigger another Great Depression, something 10 times worse than what happened in 2008. And that's why I'm speaking to you today, to show you the 5 steps you need to take to protect your family and your wealth from this looming unprecedented catastrophe. These are the same steps I'm taking to protect my loved ones. Unfortunately, our nation is facing a catch-22. We can either go back to our normal way of life and risk an explosion in coronavirus cases and thousands, maybe even millions of deaths, or fight the pandemic with lockdowns, quarantines, and business closures, bringing business and social life to a halt. The government made the right move to save lives and chose the second option. Now, shopping malls are looking like ghost towns. Automobile factories are being closed indefinitely. And shops, gyms, bars, colleges, schools, and restaurants are all on lockdown. Economists fear that by the time the coronavirus pandemic is over, entire industries could be wiped out, and millions of American workers could end up jobless. This is unprecedented, and it's why I'm convinced that historians will look back and call this the beginning of the 2020 Great Depression in America. We're already in a recession, and that's not just me saying. Bank of America just warned all their clients with this urgent note. We are officially declaring that the economy has fallen into a recession, joining the rest of the world, and it is a deep plunge. Jobs will be lost, wealth will be destroyed, and confidence depressed. But it's about to get a lot worse. Nouriel Roubini, an economist, professor at New York University, who predicted the 2008 collapse, says, "The risk of a new Great Depression, worse than the original, is rising by the day." Carmen Reinhart, a professor of economics and finance at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, says, "This could morph into a financial crisis. We will see higher default rates and business failures. It could be like the 1930s. Even the mainstream media like Bloomberg has started to sound the alarm. Check out this headline. Top economists see echoes of depression in U.S. sudden stop." In my 40 years advising financial institutions and the U.S. intelligence community, I can honestly say I have never, ever seen this level of chaos around the world. Look, I know that it can be hard to believe we'll face another Great Depression, but you don't have to believe me and all these other economists right now. Let me show you all the proof I've gathered. Then you can decide for yourself if you should really protect your wealth and your family. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you how this economic shutdown will have a domino effect like we've never seen before. We're just watching the first domino fall right now. Health restrictions have forced retailers, casinos, restaurants, and universities to go dark. Once bustling airports are deserted. Highways and subways are empty. Factories are shutting down. That's why the first domino will be depression levels of unemployment. I'm talking about 25% or more. I'll even show you how a member of our own central bank is already projecting even higher unemployment rates. And if this scenario the government is planning for happens, then the next domino to fall will be massive bankruptcies, even from blue chip companies like American Airlines. Then the crisis will spread to other important areas of the economy, like the real estate market. After all, how can you pay your mortgage if you don't have a job? With companies going bankrupt and unable to pay their debt, then the crisis will spread to banks and financial institutions. Think 2008 on steroids, with a scenario where you can't even get your own cash from your bank account. Then the last domino to fall will be a complete collapse of our society and rule of law. I'm talking about massive social unrest. You may think this can't happen here in America, but if that's really impossible, why then is the U.S. military already preparing for widespread violence from food shortages? According to Newsweek, 3 weeks ago, the military issued standby orders to prepare for some form of martial law in extreme circumstances. Look, I'm not trying to scare you, and I really hope and pray I'm wrong. I hope everything I'm saying here never comes to pass. But as a former advisor to the CIA and the Pentagon, I can't simply bury my head in the sand and ignore all the facts. And the facts couldn't be clearer. which is why I'm recommending that you take these 5 steps to protect your family against the Great Depression of 2020. I've already taken a few of these steps to protect my family. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you a little known strategy that can make you money even if stocks are crashing. 3 toxic but popular stocks you need to avoid right now. 5 recession-proof stocks to buy right now. I'll even tell you where I already invested $1 million of my own money. Many other savvy investors are piling into these investments because they know there's no time to waste. Deutsche Bank economists already warned their clients. The U.S. economy is currently undergoing a truly unprecedented shock that is likely to continue for some time, with the spread of the virus set to accelerate further in the coming weeks. Unfortunately, most Americans will ignore all the warning signs and will just hope for the best. And by the time they wake up to reality, it will be too late for them. I tell you this from personal experience, because when I predicted the 2008 crash, those who ignored my warnings were caught by surprise when the meltdown happened. You see, I've been advising the U.S. government on matters of national security for years now. In the late 1990s, for example, I worked side by side with the members of the Federal Reserve Bank to save America from a $1.3 trillion banking crisis. It could have destroyed the U.S. economy, but thanks to my work, it never happened. After 9/11, I started working with senior military leaders at the Pentagon and the highest ranks of the CIA, and helped them create a financial system to predict the next 9/11 by analyzing unusual trading activity in airline stocks. I've given advice to members of President Trump's cabinet. I've been inside the West Wing of the White House, the U.S. Treasury, and the boardroom at the Federal Reserve. And I've built my career predicting events that most people thought were unthinkable. For example, when I predicted the 2008 housing collapse, no one believed me. In the summer of 2008, I wrote this letter to top advisors in the presidential campaign. Quote, "We can expect another panic spike in October 2008. This financial crisis is not over." Of course, nobody in Washington believed that another crash could happen. But 3 weeks later, Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. Panic took over. Markets crashed across the world, ruining the retirement of millions. An estimated $2.4 trillion disappeared almost overnight from Americans' 401ks and IRAs when the market crashed in 2008. 8.7 million people lost their jobs, and over 10 million lost their homes in the United States alone. Once Congress realized I was right, they invited me to testify in the Senate about the state of the economy. Most people who ignored my warnings are still dealing with the consequences to this day. Check out these headlines. A decade after the Great Recession, 1 in 3 Americans still haven't recovered. Or this one. A decade since 2008 financial crisis, most Americans haven't recovered. And this one from 2018. Seniors are still struggling to recover after the financial crisis. Imagine what will happen this time. This won't be another Great Recession. It will be a depression. That's a big difference. Former Federal Reserve Vice Chairman Alan Blinder, now a Princeton University professor, explains. We think of a depression as a recession that is very, very deep and very, very long. That's the kind of thing that could happen. That's why the New York Times is predicting this economic crash will be more severe than the Great Recession. And a veteran analyst on CNBC anticipates that we will have the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression in 1929. Make no mistake, this won't be one of those crises where we quickly recover. America's first Great Depression lasted for a full decade, from 1929 to 1939. The Great Depression of 2020 doesn't look like it will be any different. That's why I want to show you the exact 5 steps you need to take right now to prepare for this depression. Because honestly, I'm afraid nobody else will show you exactly what to do. Look, if you lost money in 2008 and are still dealing with the consequences, I can't really blame you. Just like today, there was a lot of misinformation back then. Think about it. Did the mainstream news ever warn you to prepare? No, they only reported on it after the carnage had happened. Something similar is going on today. The media is very good at fear-mongering and reporting half-truth stories of death and stock market crashes just to get attention. But they're not telling anyone how to prepare for the worst. That's why today I'm going to give you 5 actionable steps to take to protect your family and your wealth. If you follow these steps, I'm confident you'll have the best chance of escaping unscathed from this unprecedented crisis. And you'll be able to secure a comfortable retirement and financial future. But you must act fast, because things are developing at breakneck speed. Just look at this headline from early March 2020. Economy adds booming 273,000 jobs in February as unemployment rate falls to 3.5% from 3.6%. Then just a few weeks later, Bloomberg published this story. The U.S. is entering a recession. The ultimate fear is that it could turn into a protracted malaise that has some flavor of a depression. This article went on to warn that this could get a lot worse, fast. Just think about it. Just a few weeks ago, everything was just fine. Now you can't even find toilet paper and even food in some grocery stores. Every day, thousands of Americans are getting fired, and a bunch of companies already have filed for bankruptcy. Look at it this way. Americans right now are standing at the very bottom of a tall mountain, like Mount Everest, Mount Kilimanjaro. About halfway up the mountain, there's a catastrophic avalanche barreling down towards us. What should you do? Should you just watch the avalanche coming and hope for the best? Or should you recognize the severity of the situation and take action to protect yourself? Your answer to this question could seal your financial future. Things are moving so fast that even if you wait one day to take these 5 steps I'll explain here, it might be too late. That's why recently I've been warning everyday folks about the instability of the stock market and our financial system, and how a black swan event like the coronavirus could send the entire system tumbling down. Multiple TV channels have invited me to help their viewers prepare. I've also published a series of best-selling books to warn everyday Americans about lurking disasters. And back in January 2020, way before the market started to panic, I sent this note called Contagion to a small group of readers, warning them this would get much worse, and saying that the crisis that started in China could quickly spread and create a global crisis. But today is the first time ever I'm going public with the exact 5 steps you need to take to prepare for this national crisis. These are the same steps I'm following to protect my family and my wealth. But before we get to those steps, let me show you all the facts I've uncovered so you can decide for yourself if I'm just blowing smoke. The first thing you should know is that the 2020 stock market crash will mark the beginning of America's second depression, just like it happened in 1929. As you can see, stocks have crashed faster than the 1929 crash. I don't know if you know this, but the stock market crash of October 1929 signaled the start of what became known as the Great Depression. Back then, falling stock values helped undermine consumer confidence and business investment, and that led to a sharp economic decline that spread from the United States to other countries and continued for nearly 3.5 years. Not until the spring of 1933 did the American economy begin to recover. What do you think is going to happen this time? It's going to be even worse because we're facing an unprecedented event where our economy is basically shut down due to social isolation. This has never happened before. Think about it. Consumer spending is what drives the U.S. economy. It accounts for 70% of GDP. Right now, it's impossible for consumers to spend at restaurants, malls, theaters, or on travel. With all those businesses closing or suspending operations, that's why former White House chief economist Kevin Hassett says that if everybody stays home for 6 months, it's going to be like the Great Depression. Like I mentioned earlier, this will have a huge domino effect. With businesses shutting their doors, we're already seeing the first domino fall. Domino number 1, massive unemployment. As Barron's wrote recently, millions of layoffs are coming. Hotels, airlines, and retailers warn. It's already happening. In New Jersey, 15,000 people applied for unemployment benefits in a single day, and 45,000 Ohio workers applied for unemployment in just 1 week. According to Moody's Analytics, up to 80 million jobs in the U.S. economy are at risk. That's more than half of all the existing jobs in the United States today. Even members of our own central bank, the Federal Reserve, are preparing, with the Fed's member James Bullard predicting a possible 30% unemployment. To put that into perspective, U.S. unemployment peaked at 10% during the Great Recession. During the Great Depression, unemployment spiked to 24.9% in 1933. In other words, he's saying this could get worse than the Great Depression. And remember, this is just the first domino to drop. With millions of Americans being laid off, what do you think will happen to their bills? They won't get paid, and that's when the second domino will drop. Domino number 2, massive bankruptcies. It's not just everyday Americans who won't be able to pay the bills. Companies will also struggle. Several industries are already at risk of shutting down. Hotel executives told USA Today that half of U.S. hotels could close amid the coronavirus crisis. Airlines across the world are grounding planes and laying off workers right and left. According to CAPA, the Center for Aviation, most airlines in the world will be bankrupt by the end of May, unless the governments intervene. Even Boeing, a giant company with 100,000 employees, is already asking for a government bailout. And the travel industry isn't the only sector getting wiped out. CNBC just reported that 2020 looks like it will set a record for retail stores closing in the United States. The CEO of retail advisory and research firm Coresight Research said there could be more than 15,000 store closures in 2020. And since nobody is shopping or traveling, the oil industry is also getting absolutely leveled as well. That's why former Home Depot CEO Bob Nardelli believes that half of the major fracking companies will go bankrupt soon. And check this out. In less than a week, the amount of distressed debt has exploded to $1 trillion, reaching 2008 levels. This is the amount of debt from companies the market thinks might not get paid in full. Phil B., a senior distressed credit analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence, says, "What we are seeing now is fast and violent. The worst is yet to come." Bankruptcy expert Ed Altman also agrees with me. He said, "A lot of marginal companies are going to be forced out of business." This crisis could also force entire cities to cut personnel, slash services, and eliminate programs, including big cuts on pension plans. California Senator John Morlock, for example, says, "It's going to be a mess. I don't know how it plays out. It's not going to be pretty." The Washington Post also warned states and cities should brace themselves for a downward spiral. With a massive wave of bankruptcies on the way, it's just a matter of time before the third domino drops. Domino number 3. Contagion will spread to key areas of the economy, such as the real estate market. We all remember how the real estate market crash had huge implications for the economy. Well, how do you think folks who are losing their jobs will be able to pay their mortgages? They won't. That's why the CEO of the Mortgage Bankers Association, Bob Brooksmith, said that the mortgage finance system is in danger of bankruptcy. He's even sent a letter to the Federal Reserve requesting a bailout. Sales of new homes are already starting to decline, which is exactly how the 2007 housing collapse started. The National Association of Realtors did a recent survey, and they saw a marked decline in buyer interest. Buckle your seatbelts, because here we go again. Some economists are already making some dire predictions, like this one. Home sales could fall 34% as coronavirus stalls spring housing market, new analysis says. And this one. U.S. real estate in jeopardy. Analysts predict housing market crash to 29-year lows. Economist Tendayi Kafize believes the U.S. could see a complete shutdown in the housing market. The commercial real estate market will also suffer. Bloomberg recently reported that some big retailers like Mattress Firm and Subway are already struggling to pay their rent. The article went on to say that the stakes are high. If retail withholds payments, there would be a ripple effect. Landlords can't afford to stop collecting rent for long. With many property owners sitting on loads of debt, the situation is likely to get messier. That's why billionaire investor Carl Icahn told CNBC that commercial real estate is going to blow up. That's a $16 trillion ticking time bomb that could alone bring the entire financial system down. Another real estate mogul, billionaire Tom Barrack, agrees with me. If the government doesn't take prompt action, he's predicting a domino effect of borrower defaults that will swiftly and severely impact the broad range of stakeholders in the entire real estate market, including property and homeowners, landlords, developers, hotel operators, and the respective tenants and employees. And he said the impact could dwarf that of the Great Depression. Well, you know the saying, if you owe the bank $100, that's your problem. But if you owe the bank $100 million, that's the bank's problem. So with everyone struggling to pay their loans, the next domino will drop. Domino number 4. Banks will fail, and we'll see a credit crunch worse than 2008. Check out this headline from the Wall Street Journal. Consumers face a massive credit crunch. Lenders are still figuring out what to do. The article went on to say that U.S. consumers are facing what could become the biggest credit crunch since the Great Depression. The Guardian believes that the coronavirus will cause a credit crunch that could make 2008 look like child's play. And take a look at this headline. Credit markets signal the U.S. risks heading towards a financial crisis. Since businesses have loaded up on debt in the low interest rate years after the 2008 financial crisis, the global leveraged loan market is estimated to be anywhere from $1 trillion to $3 trillion. And the coronavirus just exposed how fragile the banking system is. I've been warning about all the debt buildup for years, and now the chickens are coming home to roost. Lindsay David, consultant at LF Economics, said it best when he wrote, "We know everyone is over-leveraged, full bore, full risk. All we were waiting for was a trigger, and unfortunately that has come in the form of a health crisis. That's why banks could be in big trouble. So with massive unemployment, massive bankruptcies, both the stock market and housing collapsing, the possibility of banks going belly up, the last domino will drop. Domino number 5, a complete breakdown of society. Imagine a situation where you're unable to get even basic items like toilet paper and food. Just a few weeks ago, that seemed ridiculous. And yet we already saw how a mini panic led to empty grocery shelves across the country. Remember that government document I showed you earlier? The one preparing for a crisis that could last 18 months? Well, that official document warned shortages of products may occur, impacting healthcare, emergency services, and other elements of critical infrastructure. If you think that can't really happen in America, check out this recent video. You're watching hundreds of cars waiting to receive food from the Greater Community Food Bank in Pittsburgh. That reminds me of the sad scenes of the last Depression, when Americans lined up by the thousands for food. So what do you think is going to happen when all those other dominoes have fallen? It's likely we'll see some social unrest and massive crimes in some areas of the country. Some high-end stores across the country are already boarding up their stores in anticipation of civil unrest. No wonder gun sales are absolutely exploding as more and more Americans are preparing for a complete breakdown of our society. That's why in the next few minutes I'm going to show you the 5 steps you should take not only to protect your family, but also protect and even grow your wealth. But before we get to that, you're probably asking yourself, but can't the government save us? Look, I still remember my interview at the NASDAQ Stock Exchange headquarters in New York last year. It's where I predicted the U.S. Federal Reserve raised the interest rates to 2.5% as a scheme to prepare for the next recession. I explained this would give the central bank an opportunity to cut rates back down in the event of another potential economic crisis, and that is exactly what happened. In an effort to save the economy, the Federal Reserve announced on March 15th that it would cut interest rates to as low as 0%. They're also preparing to inject $1.5 trillion into Wall Street banks. Can they stop the bleeding? I'm afraid the government won't be able to bail out the economy this time around. Here's why. Lower interest rates increase economic growth by driving up demand, but nobody's consuming anything because of the lockdown. That's a demand shock. But the virus pandemic is also disrupting the supply chain, affecting the supply of goods. That's a supply shock. For the first time ever, we have both a demand and a supply shock, and cutting rates won't fix that. That's why stock markets crashed after the Fed announced rate cuts. Investors know this won't work this time. Check out this headline. Stock market futures sink after emergency Fed rate cut. If this doesn't work, what will? So unlike 2008, there's no telling how low the stock market could go. You can print all the money you want, but if people are not borrowing it, if they're not spending it, it won't work. Let me explain. Let's say I go out to dinner and I tip the waiter, and the waiter